Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are all safe and healthy and are doing well. Today is Christmas Eve and I come to you from my little apartment in Chicago, and today we are chipping my P72 ECU. Now some of you may know that I'm running a GSR swap in my car, which is a B18C1, and the P72 is the corresponding ECU that goes with that swap. Now I'll give you guys a little bit of backstory on why I'm doing this DIY. It's gonna be pretty comprehensive and show you guys step by step on how I perform the chipping process. A lot of you may not know, but about 10 years ago, I dove headfirst into the OBD1 ECU world. And at the time I had a Civic hatch, it was a DX, so it had a D15B7 in it, and it was automatic. So when I was in school going through college, a big project of mine was converting that over to a manual transmission. The swap that I found was a D16Z6, which came out of this SI trim level. So I had to have the proper ECU to do it, but instead I had the P06, which came with the car already. And I was just going to convert that over to a VTEC ECU and ship it and run a P28 base map on it. I looked at all the documents online, the how-tos, the write-ups, everything on how to chip an OBD1 ECU. So of course I performed the job, and lo and behold, the car runs perfectly fine. So then I started chipping all my friends' ECUs and random people online that would find me. And before I knew it, I was like, hey, what if I start like a small side business with this where I just like provide the service of chipping ECUs. I would do Hondata S300 installs, I would do Moats Demon installs. I mean, pretty much the same processes, but the more ECUs I did, the better I got. And I eventually came up with my own little side business, and I called it Brain Built ECU. And I was shipping ECUs to like Florida, to California. I had a guy from Ireland that would buy them in bulk, so I would just grab a bunch of ECUs, I would chip all of them, and I spent extra time on each ECU to make sure that everything was perfect. So I did that for a few years, and then I moved to Chicago, and it was just too much of a hassle with my work schedule, so I just stopped doing it cold turkey. So that's just a little bit of a backstory on why I'm doing this DIY and why I think I'm a little bit qualified to do this, because I've done so many ECUs in the past. I'll go ahead and show you guys my equipment. Now, this stuff is pretty hefty for a single ECU chipping job. You don't need this type of equipment to chip your ECUs. I was just producing a whole bunch of them, so it was easier to have a soldering station of this caliber so that I could push out product. All right, and this is my soldering setup right here. This is an LF8800K from Zytronic. This thing was my workhorse when I was producing a lot of ECUs. It solders and it desolders, and it's also temperature controlled for either one of the soldering irons. This is a soldering iron right here. It's a real nice little piece there, nice and small. Nice grip. And this is the desoldering iron right here. You can see there's a vacuum line going from it back to the actual machine here. And inside here, there's actually a vacuum pump. So when you're heating up a solder joint with the tip here, you can hit this red button and it'll activate the vacuum pump in here for a couple of seconds. And it'll suck the hot solder through into a little glass cylinder in here that has some material that'll basically store that solder. Really nice piece if you're doing a lot of desoldering. That has saved me so much time. And then this is a little, well, pretty big spool of solder wire here. And then I've got a little fume extractor here. Basically, you just put this nice and close to your soldering station. You just hit the switch. It's basically a puller fan with a charcoal filter on it. Basically just cleans up the air. Those fumes can really get to you after some time, so it's really nice to have that piece. But this is basically what I'll be using to chip this guy right here. All right, we'll go ahead and go through what we're installing into the ECU today. This is the actual chipping kit itself. This is really the only thing you need. I also have a capacitor set and a CN2 Bluetooth module. We'll go ahead and go over these in a little bit, but we'll push them aside for now. And this set is all you really need. This is the complete chipping kit right here. We'll go ahead and pull it out. All the little components will go over each and every single little one. We'll go ahead and do that right now. All right, we have everything laid out here. I'll go over exactly what each component is. I won't necessarily explain what each one does quite yet. We'll go over that process once we start soldering components in. This piece here is called the dip socket. That's DIP, which stands for dual inline pin. This guy right here is a ZIF socket. That's ZIF, which stands for zero insertion force. Now this right here is a 27SF512. This is the actual chip itself that the base map gets burned onto. This is the 74HC373 latching chip. This is the CN2 data logging port, and these two are identical capacitors for C51 and C52. This is the R54 resistor, which I don't believe the P72 has, so I really won't even need this piece. And then this is the main capacitor in the board. This is the C14 capacitor. All right, so we'll go ahead and start to disassemble the ECU itself. It's got two covers, one on the top and one on the bottom, and we got 5 Phillips head screwdrivers on each side. So we'll go ahead and get those off. All right, now that we have the covers off, what I like to do is I like to remove the printed circuit board out of the case itself. It just allows me to access the solder joints a little bit easier without having to mess around with the case here and the aluminum bar that goes through the middle here. One thing you'll notice that's different on the P72 from say a P28 or a P08 is that it's got this extra printed circuit board here. It's like a little daughter board. And on the GSR engine, it actually has a knock sensor, and that's what this is for. This controls the whole knock program here. So we'll take off these 3 screws here. That'll release this little daughter board here. We'll flip it over. It's got 7 screws in the back end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And one last one right up here. It actually holds this little integrated circuit here to the case to use it as a heat sink. Once those are all off, then we could pop the circuit board from the case. All right, now that we got the circuit board out of the case, let's go over exactly what your focus area is going to be. With the circuit board on your tabletop, connectors facing the left, you're going to be focusing on this bottom right area here. This is where majority of the components are going to be soldered in. C14, if you remember, that big capacitor is right over here on the far left. Now, if you remember, we had this capacitor set as well. It's got another 7 capacitors here. And if you look on the board, you can count 7. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then you have your big C14 there. So you actually have a total of 8 of them. Only the big one comes with the chipping kit. Now, these necessarily aren't required to be replaced, but you got to remember that capacitors are just like batteries where that they have acid inside of them too. These are 20, 25-year-old ECUs, and over time, these capacitors could start to leak and potentially damage the board. Just as maintenance, I go ahead and replace all the capacitors. This is what I used to do in all my ECUs. All right, let's get close and personal with the focus area here on the board. Let's start with J1, and it's this guy right over here. And this is that J1 jumper that you want to install. It's basically a resistor. It's got a black stripe, which signifies that it's a 0 ohm resistor. So it might as well just be a piece of wire. When you install this, it basically is acting as a switch. And it is telling the rest of the ECU that, hey, there's an external chip that I want you to read from. Read from that instead of what's in the ECU already. Just below that, typically on other ECUs like a P28 or P08, like we talked earlier, that's the location for R54 resistor. It's a 1000 ohm resistor that would go right here. P72 doesn't have that. I don't know exactly why. Maybe someone can tell me. But this guy we wanted to worry about for this install. Now, if you remember these guys, these are capacitors. These are C51 and C52. And those locations are right here. C51 is right here. C52 is right over here. And basically these are installed just to filter out extra noise. Sometimes some people don't even install these at all, but since they came with the kit, we're going to go ahead and put them in. And this is your CN2 data logging header. CN2 is located right down here. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pin locations. And as you can see, CN2 only has 4. It uses 1 through 4. So make sure you install that 1 through 4 and leave the 5 out. This is basically your data logging port. So if you want to read information from your sensors, this is where you want to tap into. And going to the 74HC373 latching chip, that gets installed right here. Very easy to locate. I mean, it literally says 74HC373 on it. I'm not exactly a computer engineer, so I don't know exactly what goes on here beyond being a memory device. And this is the main location here, the 27256. Technically, you can take the chip and solder it right to the circuit board. But when you have something like this and you're trying to burn a new map or a new tune, you literally will have to desolder the chip so that you could take this out and burn a new program onto it. That's why we have the dip socket. It allows you to solder this in place of the chip right into the 27256 spot. And then the chip will then install on top of here where you can remove and install as many times as you want. And oftentimes that can actually be a pain as well, because if you're moving your chip, installing your chip, removing your chip, you tend to start bending the pins on the actual chip itself because you actually have to force that chip out of there. That's why we have the ZIF socket. This will get installed on top of the dip socket. So imagine the dip socket being soldered onto the board, and then you install the ZIF socket on top of the dip socket, and you can see it's got a latch on it. So you can easily install and remove the chip by just latching and latching it in. It latches in just like that, and then it's nice and solid install there. And then when you unlatch it, it's easily removable out of the ZIF. Look at that, it just falls right out. That's what's nice about having a ZIF socket, is that it makes the removal and install of the chip super easy. All right, now we're getting close to the point where we can start desoldering all the holes and removing the capacitors. And what I like to do is I like to desolder every single location first, remove all the capacitors before I actually do any soldering and installs of any components. As for workflow, it just works better that way. Instead of having to desolder one part, solder one part, desolder one part, solder one part, you can just desolder everything and then solder all the components into the board. When you get to the point where you're desoldering and soldering, you want to perform all your work on the bottom of the circuit board. As you can see, there's a clear coating on the bottom. It's also at the top. It's called a conformal coating. It's a little bit blotchy right there. It's basically there to protect the solder joints from the elements and from corrosion. When I chip ECUs, I like to remove the conformal coating completely off the back of the ECU. It's not an absolute required step, but I like to do it to make my solder joints a little bit cleaner. That conformal coating doesn't get gunked up from all the heat from the soldering irons. And I do that with a product from Microcare. It's a lead-free flex remover, and it's also designed to remove acrylic-based conformal coatings, which is exactly what's on here. Now, I've seen people use carb cleaner and brake cleaner. I'm not sure if there are any long-term negative effects, but I mean, people have been successful using that stuff. But I would just rather use a product that's specifically made for this exact task. That way I can lessen the chance of damaging the board. So we'll go ahead and get this cleaned off. We'll use kind of a little bit of a toothbrush to scrub all that conformal coating off, and then we'll start desoldering all of the holes. All right, we now have the conformal coating removed. As you can see, it's got a dull finish now. It no longer has that glossy look. We can go ahead and start desoldering now. Okay, I've got the main areas desoldered. So when we turn this around, you can see right there, CN2, C51, 74HC373, C52, J1, the big ship, 27256, all that is desoldered. So up next, I need to remove the 8 capacitors, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And what I like to do is I like to go on the back end with the soldering iron, not the desoldering iron, but the normal soldering iron. And I like to kind of pull on one end And then while I'm pulling, I'll heat up the solder joint on that end. And once the solder melts, then I can kind of pull the capacitor out. I won't be able to pull it out completely, but then I'll stop there and then I'll heat up the other side and force it that way. And then I kind of just like walk it out. And then once they're all out, then I go ahead and hit it with a desoldering iron and then get all that solder out of the holes. And also pro tip for soldering these capacitors in, to keep them kind of in line. They are different capacitors. There's some that are the same, there's some that are different. To keep them in line, I match them up right over here, kind of in the same configuration. So you see there, C14, C14, then you got that other one over there, that one there, that one there. This is two pair, that single pair there, it's right here. This pair down here, right there, and then that one that's way off is right over here. So I kind of gave myself a reference just in case I forget where these go. That way I can remove them all at once and then kind of just install them one by one. All right, now we got all the capacitors removed. You can see all the spots where the capacitors used to be, right there, a couple more spots over there and over here. One little piece that we do need to remove as well is this little jumper right here, J12. See that little one with the black stripe right there? Sometimes with it installed, it can cause some connectivity issues from your laptop or software to the ECU itself. You can just take a flush cut similar to this right here, and you can clip the leads and pull it right out. So just like that. And that's it. J12 is removed. So now we'll go ahead and flip the board over and we'll kind of fill in these holes where the capacitors were with some more solder so that we can get a nice desolder. After that, we can start installing components. All right, now I got all the holes cleared out. I can start soldering now. You can see the holes in the light. Oh, they're all desoldered. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use some flux. Flux to soldering is kind of like what argon is to TIG welding. It's basically a shield that's gonna prevent that solder joint from oxidizing. So I'll go ahead and basically just take this pen and go over all these solder joints in the back, just kind of like I would with the normal marker. And I'll hit up every single part, and then we'll go ahead and start soldering. We'll go ahead and take the dip socket. You want to make sure that this half moon right on the edge over here, that notch is facing towards the connectors. Should go in just like that. You kind of have to hold it there with your thumb when you flip it over. Just like that. So what I like to do here, to prevent it from falling out, I'll go ahead and take some solder and my soldering iron, and I'll actually just try to melt some solder onto my soldering iron here. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna touch one of the tabs. I'll let it melt onto the solder joint itself, just like that. And now it's held in place. So now I'll start soldering the rest of these joints. All right, I've got everything installed now. If you look over here, I got the dip socket installed. J1 is right there. C52, C51 capacitors are installed. The 373 latching chip is installed, and so is the CN2 right here. If you look over here, all 8 capacitors are installed, all brand new, so it's nice and fresh. They're not leaking. Everything we need is there. So up next is I'm going to actually tape it off just like what I did when I was removing the conformal coating. And I'm actually going to spray a brand new coat of conformal coating on there to protect the back. It's going to look real nice, real finished. And what people sometimes use is actually just clear coat, like paint clear coat. I've never actually used that myself. Again, kind of in that situation where people have used brake cleaner and carb cleaner to clean off the conformal coating. I would just rather use something that is specifically for that. I don't know if there are any negative long-term effects of having a clear coat on the back of a printed circuit board, but again, just going to use what is supposed to be on there. All right, it's been a couple hours now and the conformal coating is nice and dry. Looks really good, real piece of art. Solder joints are good, they're protected. All the processes were done properly with the right products. This is how I do it. All right, now that we're all done shipping, let's go ahead and reinstall the circuit board back into the ECU case. Typically, I would sandblast the case, make it look real nice, just like this. But because this is a P72 and I don't have any extra P72 cases lying around, I can't really use this one because I need the actual mount holes for the daughter board here. It is actually different on a GSR. And also, we'll be using some powder coated covers just to clean it up, make it look a little bit cooler and prettier. This is the treatment that I would give the ECUs that I used to do. And also the ECU would get some new shiny hardware. Now at this point, it's time to install the ZIF socket in the chip. Technically, this would be the time where I would be burning the base map onto the chip. Right now, this chip is completely blank. Just think about it as a blank CD. It has nothing burned onto it. And once I create a base map off of Chrome, the software, I can use my chip burner and burn that program or that base map onto the chip, put it in the ECU, and then the ECU would be able to run the car. But since I'm not really doing that quite yet, we'll go ahead and put the ZIF socket in and then put the chip in right in after. All right, now that I'm pretty much done with the whole chipping process, you guys are probably wondering why I'm even chipping my ECU anyway. It's a bone stock engine. Why would I need to do this? Do you guys remember this piece at the beginning of the video where I said I had a CN2 Bluetooth module? This is the reason why. This plugs into the CN2 port, which is right up here. This is the piece that we soldered in, right? It plugs in just like that. This is what it looks like when it's completely installed. The whole point of this is so that I can dialogue wirelessly via a tablet. Yes, this is going to replace my instrument cluster. Basically a poor man's race dash. I needed to chip the ECU so that I could run the QD3 protocol that the TunerView software uses on OBD1 ECUs. I wouldn't be able to run the Bluetooth module without having the ECU chipped and having the data logging enabled in Chrome. So now that we're done chipping the ECU, in the next video I'll show you guys how to burn a base map on the chip, also including everything that needs to be enabled for the TunerView software to work. So once we have a base map burned onto the chip, I'll hook this thing up to my engine simulator and we'll see if it shoots out data logging information to the tablet. So thank you guys for watching this DIY. I hope you guys learned a thing or two. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. I know things can get pretty confusing because there's so much information online, so many different ECUs, so many different boards. So if you guys find yourselves a little bit in over your head, feel free to reach out and I'll definitely try to answer any questions that you guys have. So if you guys liked the video, please hit that like button. And if you want to stay up to date with the channel, please subscribe. Let's try to get to 1,000. I think right now we're just a few subscribers away shy from 900. So if we can get to 1,000, I would be so happy and so appreciative. Share the video, spread the good word. It would be really appreciated if you guys did that. And also you guys can hit up bvspeed.com and pick yourself up some merch. I got this crew neck sweater, obviously my 5-panel hat that I'm always wearing, a couple different t-shirt designs. Head over to the website to pick yourself up some merch. And until next time, stay safe and I'll see you guys in the next video.